This is part 6 of the series of videos on the racial origins of Indians and discusses the origins of Brahmins and how they perverted the true religion to pagan Hinduism. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. In part 1 of this series of videos on racial origins of Indians, we covered the origin of races before Noah's flood. Part 2 covered the origin of nations after Noah's flood. Part 3 covered how nations were forced to separate due to a supernatural event, destruction of the Tower of Babel, and confusion of the language of mankind. It also described how the pagans Cush, ancestor of the Ethiopians, the father of Rama and Seba, the Dravidian, and hence ancestor of most Indians, and then Nimrod, Semiramis, and Asher, ancestor of the ancient Assyrians and modern Romans, were very successful in corrupting the true religion of Noah. Part 4 described how nations were forced to move away from Babylon due to the rule and brutality of the Assyrians. Part 5 of the series described the actual racial identity of various peoples in various states in the Indian subcontinent. In this video, I will discuss in greater detail the racial origins of Brahmins of India, how and why they corrupted the pure religion and through millennia have always manipulated it with cunningly crafted lies to maintain the highest status in Indian society and assure prosperity for themselves. All of humanity has descended from Adam and Eve. All non-white races originated from the evil son Cain, who murdered his righteous brother Abel. Even after God punished him by separating him from the rest of Adam's children, he did not amend his way, but his evils and that of his descendants only multiplied continually. Cain deified himself as a titan god, and ancestor worship originated in his line. Then his non-white descendants, particularly Lamech and his line, began the practice of polygamy and interracial marriages. They also deified themselves as the Olympian gods, set up their own metal idols in temples, and demanded that the rest of humanity worship them. That's how idol worship originated in Lamech's line. The result of these practices was that the world became saturated with violence, and the thought of everyone was only evil continually. A time came when only Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Shem's wife remained racially pure white. God warned humanity through Noah to repent of its lawless ways, or he will drown the whole world in a global flood. When no one paid heed and repented, God followed through on his warning and drowned the entire world except 8 persons in Noah's flood. After the flood, all of humanity has descended from Noah's 3 sons: Shem, who married a white woman; Ham, who married the Negro looking Neama, the Athena of the Greek myths, Minerva of the Romans, and Kali Ma of India, the daughter of Lamech, who was known as Zeus or Jupiter of the myths, the only person in the history of mankind who ruled the entire world; and then Japheth, who had married an oriental looking woman, a descendant of Cain. After the flood, Noah taught his entire family the true God's religion and way of life. He began preparing the descendants of his grandson Arphaxad, the son of Shem, to be priests to the world. He taught them astronomy, which was necessary to let the world know when God's holy days were to be kept. Though Noah taught everyone God's way, the wives of Ham and Japheth taught their children also the way their ancestors had lived before the flood. Neama taught her children how her family had ruled the world. Before the flood, interracial marriages had been one of the major causes of violence and bloodshed. To prevent that from happening after the flood, God gave Noah a colonization plan for his descendants to spread out and populate different areas of the earth, which would have separated them according to race. Noah took a 10-year-long journey by land and boat with his 3 sons to scope out areas to send colonies to. During their absence, all the human family learned from Neama how her family had ruled the world before the flood. That excited the fancy of some to rule the entire world again, including that of Cush, the son of Ham and Neama, and Asher, the son of Shem. During these 10 years, the black Cush, 80 years old, seduced a strikingly beautiful and young white Semiramis, about 20 years old, and Nimrod was born of that relationship. When Noah started sending out colonies, Cush, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Asher, and a slight majority of mankind rebelled against Noah and God and refused to go to the land assigned to them. They instead went to the land of Shinar in modern Iraq and set up their own god, the sun fire serpent god and worship system, built a tower as a temple, and began building a city. Their plans were to rule the world and force their own religion on all of humanity, mix the races so that all of humanity would be of one race, one religion, and one world government. They would have executed Noah and Shem if necessary. But God intervened by destroying the tower and confusing the language of mankind. Different patriarchs and their descendants received different languages who could then no longer understand each other. The language received also corresponded to the colonization plan to separate mankind by race that God had given through Noah. It was now very difficult for people to work together. However, Cush, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Asher began to pick up the pieces of their empire. Because of difficulty in communication, people were no longer very enthusiastic about Nimrod's projects and empire. Even God's judgment in destroying the tower was not lost on the people and had dimmed their enthusiasm for it. Therefore, to keep his empire together, Nimrod and Cush had to use brute force. Josephus states in Antiquities of the Jews 1, Book 4, Chapter 2, he, Nimrod, also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. The rebels were well organized and had implemented a tribute or tax system taught to them by Neama. They were thus able to implement big construction projects such as building cities. The rebel government appeared civilized, living in cities compared to those following Noah who lived in villages, thus appearing to be less civilized. Those following Noah used only a tithing system, that is, 1/10 of the net income, to finance religious education, record keeping, and government activities handled mostly by Arphaxad and his descendants, the priests personally trained by Noah. The rebels continued to develop their pagan religion, adding many rituals and customs to it. Then Nimrod introduced live human and infant sacrifices. Nimrod traveled far and wide to spread his religion with the aim of bringing all of humanity into it by selling the civilized nature of his government, but forcibly where necessary. The rebels then realized that they needed a trained priesthood to teach and propagate their religion. They hit on a master stroke to do so, as advised by Neama, based on her family experiences before the flood. Arphaxad's descendants were the only ones trained by Noah to be priests, the only ones with the best available knowledge of astronomy which the rebels did not possess, possessing the only written records of true history before and after the flood as passed down through Noah and Shem, and how to write and preserve them, which means they were the most literate people. And then they had knowledge and expertise of sacrifices and every aspect of religion. But they depended on the goodwill of the people to faithfully pay their tithes and offerings to maintain them and their worship system. It would be an incredible prize for the rebels if they could win the descendants of Arphaxad over to their side and use them to propagate their own religion around the world instead of Noah's religion. Before the flood, material progress in Lamech's family had corrupted even the descendants of Seth, who had been preachers of righteousness and God's way of life. Neama, the daughter of Lamech, explained it to the rebels. The master stroke of the rebels was to use the same tactic to corrupt the descendants of Arphaxad. They simply invited them with massive financial incentives of profit and riches to become priests of their religion and forsake the true religion as taught by Noah and Shem. The type of incentives offered to them were described by Diodorus of Sicily in his historical library in Book 1, Chapter 2, pages 27 to 29. But being willing to encourage the priests, the only ones trained as priests were the descendants of Arphaxad, to these divine offices by profit and advantage, Semiramis gave them the third part of the country for the maintenance of the service of the gods and their attendance at altars. Thus, massive profit was the motive for the willingness of the priests to go along with her Babylonian mystery worship system, recording of perverted history, and all else she required them to do. Just imagine what ownership of one third of all the land meant. It was better than any tax or tribute to support them, and far better than much more profit and much more profitable than Noah's tithing system. Ownership of the land also went with the law that no taxes and tribute was to be levied on the priests. They could ask the common people then to till the land for them in return for perhaps half the crops. That would enable them, in fact, it was half the crops. That would enable them to maintain the temple complexes and pay themselves. In addition, they would receive the religious offerings of the people and even require specific offerings from the people that they could devise for their own profit in the guise of pleasing the gods or for the performance of services on behalf of the people, such as marriages and funerals, etc. Such incredible financial incentives were too good to pass up. All of Arphaxad's descendants, except one, that is Abraham, willingly gave up worship of the true God to propagate Semiramis's and Nimrod's pagan religion. Paganism is worship of anything other than the true Creator God. Wherever organized religion is found today, whether true or corrupt, has come down to us through the descendants of Arphaxad. Abraham was a descendant of Arphaxad also, but God preserved the true religion only through his descendants, Isaac, and then Jacob, whose later God given name was Israel, and the 12 tribes of Israel descended from Jacob. Even Abraham's father had given into paganism. When Abraham was young, he and his older brother Haran were forced to pay tribute by the Assyrians. A time came when they refused to do so. The Assyrian count then came and attacked Haran and Abraham. Haran was killed in that battle. Abraham fled with his wife Sarah to be with his ancestor Shem. That's where Abraham acquired knowledge of the true God and his ways and obtained ancient historical records, while all the rest of Arphaxad's other descendants had been perverted by Semiramis's financial incentives. At that early time in human history after the flood, when the world population was growing but was only about 100,000 to 250,000, even though humanity had become divided due to confusion of languages, most of the population had not gone far from Armenia, where Noah operated from and had sent out colonies, or the land of Shinar or Babylon, from where the rebels operated. Noah had sent out colonies to lands on the Mediterranean coast only yet, Egypt and Libya in Africa, Italy, Spain, and Greece in Europe. Others who were sent out towards the northeast, that is Magog and his descendants, ancestor of the Chinese. They had not moved far away yet. The descendants of the rebels were all still living close to Babylon. To propagate the rebels' religion throughout the world, therefore, all that Semiramis and the Assyrians and Babylonians had to do was plant the descendants of Arphaxad as priests in key areas among different peoples with incredible incentives of land, freedom from tribute and taxes, and the offerings of the people. In her life, Semiramis had been active in Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria. The priests in Egypt worked with Semiramis. Paganism could thus cover all the descendants of Ham in Africa. They were planted in Babylon. Their descendants later came to be known as the Chaldeans and actually built the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar. In Babylon, they literally became priests to the tribes that migrated east into Asia, including India. Among Indians, they came to be known as the Brahmins. Later, Horus, the son of Semiramis, in a relationship with Ninus II of Assyria, took a colony of them from Babylon into Europe after they had learnt the Babylonian mystery religion. They later settled in Italy, where Noah lived out his last days, and propagated Semiramis's Babylonian mystery religion from there to Europe. After Nimrod had instituted human and infant sacrifices and had become active in Europe to propagate his religion, God decided that he should be executed for his many crimes. Shem carried out that task. His body was cut into many pieces, and the pieces sent to different people as a warning to the apostates who would worship the pagan god they had created. After Semiramis learned that Nimrod was dead, she fled Egypt for her life to Babylon. Though the pagans were now afraid to worship the sun fire serpent god openly, Semiramis developed her Babylonian mysteries religion. They continued their pagan worship system but used symbols such as the bull and calf to worship Nimrod and cow and trees to worship Semiramis. They also added many more rituals and ceremonies to the religion. Diodorus then described what Semiramis did later with the pieces of Nimrod's body. After his, that is Osiris, which was Nimrod's Egyptian name, after his death, Isis, which was the Egyptian name for Semiramis, and Mercury, Ash's Egyptian name, they celebrated his funeral with sacrifices and other divine honors as to one of the gods, and instituted many sacred rites and mystical ceremonies in memory of the mighty works wrought by this hero, now deified. Anciently, the Egyptian priests kept the manner of the death of Osiris, that he was slain and his body cut into pieces, sent to different areas of human population at that time. They kept it secret in their own registers among themselves. But in after times it fell out that some that could not hold blurted it out, and so it came abroad. Semiramis found all the pieces of his body save his privy members, and having a desire to conceal her husband, so Nimrod was her son, and later she married him and he became her husband. To conceal her husband's burial, yet to have him honored as a god by all the Egyptians, she thus contrived it. She closed all the pieces together, cementing them with wax and aromatic spices, and so brought it to the shape of a man of the bigness of Osiris. Then she sent for the priests to her, one by one, and swore them all that they should not discover what she should then entrust them with. Then she told them privately that they only should have the burial of the king's body, and recounting the many good works he had done, charged them to bury the body in a proper place among themselves, and to pay unto him all divine honor as to a god, that they should dedicate to him one of the beasts, a bull, bred among them, which of them they pleased, and that while it was alive they should pay it the same veneration as they did before to Osiris himself, and when the bull was dead, that they should worship it with the same adoration and worship given to Osiris. So those are the origins of bull worship. But being willing to encourage the priests to these divine offices by profit and advantage, she gave them the third part of the country for the maintenance of the service of the gods and their attendance at altars. In memory, therefore, of Osiris's good deeds, being incited thereunto by the commands of the queen, and in expectation of their own profit and advantage, the priests exactly performed everything that Isis enjoined them, and therefore every order of the priests of this day, the Brahmins know Nimrod as Krishna, every order of the priests of this day are of opinion that Osiris is buried among them, and they have those beasts in great veneration that were so long since thus consecrated, and renew their mournings for Osiris over the graves of those beasts, that is, the bulls that were buried. These are two sacred bulls, especially the one called Apis and the other Mnevis, that are consecrated to Osiris and reputed as gods generally by all the Egyptians. For this creature of all others was extraordinarily serviceable to the first inventors of husbandry, both as to the sowing of corn and other advantages concerning tillage, of which all reaped the benefits. But then Diodorus continues, Nimrod's Privy members, they say, were thrown into the river by Typhon, who was one of the Egyptian princes who helped Shem execute Nimrod, because none of his partners would receive them, and yet they were divinely honored by Isis, meaning Semiramis, for she commanded an image of this very part to be set up in the temples and to be religiously adored, and in all their ceremonies and sacrifices to this god. So she set up the phallus as a god. She ordered that part to be held in divine veneration and honor. The Grecians, after they had learnt the rites and ceremonies from the Egyptians, adored that member by the name of phallus. That is the origin of phallus worship, the Shiv Linga of the Hindus. Satan can truly induce human beings to do perverse things in the name of religion. Now, several things can be noted about what the priests were willing to do. They were willing to keep secret the way Nimrod died and maintain lies instead at the urging of Semiramis. In doing so, they perverted true history. They gave up the true religion and were willing to wholeheartedly propagate the completely false religion concocted by Cush, Nimrod, and Semiramis. They were willing to worship and honor bulls, knowing that in doing so they were actually worshipping Nimrod. But they concocted lies and false reasoning to tell the people that bulls, calves, and cows were being worshipped as gods because of their usefulness to mankind. They also concocted reasons to justify phallus worship or Shivling by the Brahmins. In fact, the Brahmins of India have developed elaborate rituals, symbols, and ceremonies and concocted lies in the religions centered around the worship of the Shivlinga and temples dedicated to it. The priests were very creative in propagating Semiramis's religion and counter any opposition to it. It was easy for them to do so in Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, and among Indians because they were already under the influence of Nimrod and Semiramis, all these areas. In Europe, however, Noah lived many decades and Shem was also active. It required creativity to counter the teachings of Noah. After Noah's death, the priests deified Noah and began worshipping him as the god Janus and Vertumnus. Salverty, in his History of the Names of Men, Nations, and Places, written in French by Eusebius Salverty and translated into English by L.H. Mordecue, Volume 2, in London, 1862, which is written on page 355. Had a Christian writer transported Noah into Italy, he would have represented him as teaching the early people the law of the God of Genesis. But a Chaldean priest makes Xisuthros, meaning Noah, into a propagator of the worship of the gods and ends by identifying him with the life of the world, the God of the universe. This shows that the Chaldean priests in Italy worshipped Noah as a god but pictured him propagating their own religion. Salverty implies that the European priests appropriated Noah's name but propagated their own religion, claiming that Noah taught those things and that they were doing what he commanded and were following his teachings. But in their teachings, they were forsaking what Noah really taught. This parallels what the Roman Catholic Church would do later to the teachings of Jesus Christ, foisting the rituals, celebrations, festivals, and symbols of the Babylonian mystery religion to Roman Catholicism by attaching concocted Christian significance to them. Now, Semiramis, born about 60 years after the flood, lived a long, active, and very productive life of about 300 years, which was cut short in a war with her own son Horus to retain the throne of Assyria. But why was she and Nimrod so successful in totally perverting religion? Semiramis was a very beautiful woman and retained her incredible beauty even in her later years. She had a great hold over the people. That's why she was so successful in having her lies so readily accepted by the people. Her beauty is said to have once quelled a rising rebellion among her subjects when she suddenly appeared among them. This is stated in Valerius Maximus's Library, 9th chapter 3, page 2. Semiramis also had supernatural or demonic help in enhancing her credibility. Nimrod was said to have been the first who invented the magic arts. He used magic tricks, as stated by Justinius Historia, Library 1, Volume 2, page 615, to impress the people as the high priest of the sun fire serpent god. No one seems to have used magic arts before the flood. After Nimrod's death, Semiramis used magic tricks to impress the converts of her Babylonian mystery religion. She claimed to be able to perform acts such as levitation with the power of the gods she had concocted, but who were really pre-flood characters who had deified themselves and later deifying Nimrod and herself. The magic tricks were, of course, performed by demons to build up her credibility. There is further proof that Nimrod was demon possessed. Nimrod is listed as the second Chinese king in their canon of history. It states his eyes had double pupils, whence he was named double brightness, meaning his eyes shone with double brightness. He had a large mouth and a black body. That is describing a demon possessed black man. He is also described as a foreigner. The Egyptian name for Nimrod was Osiris. Diodorus, in his historical library on page 19, says, Osiris in the Greek language justifies a thing with many eyes, viewing and surveying the whole land and sea. Osiris is also called Dionysius, another name attributed to Nimrod by Semiramis to give credit for the deeds of the pre-flood Dionysius in the process of deifying Nimrod, and is described as Dionysius darts his fiery eyes. Again, this is describing a demon-possessed man. Only a demon-possessed man and woman, Nimrod and Semiramis, could have initiated human and infant sacrifices in their worship system. And only a demon-possessed man like Nimrod could make the boasts that Krishna makes in the Gita. That is why Semiramis and Nimrod were so successful in fabricating a completely different religion than taught and practiced by Noah, have it accepted by the priests, and propagated among the people because of financial rewards. After her death, the priests, the descendants of Arphaxad, then took up the task of propagating the religion among whichever people they settled. Over 4 millennia, the practices among various peoples have diverged because the priests continued to innovate as the need arose to keep their hold over the people and add practices and rituals as the times demanded to counter the thrusts of other religions or add explanations for great questions that might have arisen over time. But the origins of all paganism are the same. In the false sun fire serpent god, Cush, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Asher set up, and the worship system built around them. The Brahmins propagated that among Indians. The priests kept the records and penned scriptures, adding moral teachings to them continually. So when Brahmins of India defend Hinduism, they usually cite moral teachings as examples of what is good or great about their religion. But knowledge produced by humans can be good or evil, or a combination of the two. God foretold this when Adam and Eve rebelled against him in the Garden of Eden by eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He removed them from the garden to develop their own civilization. That knowledge was symbolized by the tree being of the knowledge of good mixed with evil. That is why Hinduism and every pagan religion will have some good moral teachings in it which can benefit society. But all paganism is mixed with evil as well, and paganism and its non-existent gods cannot offer salvation. Only the true God can offer salvation to human beings in the form of eternal life. Thus we have seen that all the priests in every human history till about 400 years after the flood were descendants of Arphaxad, the third son of Shem. They were taught astronomy, mathematics, and all the science Noah knew and their priestly duties by Noah. but for profit and the massive financial incentives offered by Nimrod and Semiramis, they forsook the true religion as preached by Noah, wholeheartedly adopted the totally false pagan religion concocted by Cush, Nimrod, Semiramis, and Asher, and enthusiastically propagated to all of humanity. Therefore, there is nothing holy about a Brahmin in India or true about his religion. That religion, Hinduism, is the very antithesis of the true religion. Worships false made up gods that don't exist in rituals, practices, and festivals that are an abomination to the only true creator God. The religion was conceived and born in rebellion against the true God, defended with more cunningly crafted lies as the need arose, and with force and murder where necessary. I will explain that part of the history of the Brahmins in my next series of videos. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to watch and get information on the latest videos.